Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good morning from the Batcave. It is Saturday. It is, let's see, July 18th, 2026. And I want to talk to you guys a bit about the LXX. I'm trying to summarize this because it very much points to the conclusions that I came to for my Serpent by the Way book. And it's something that I think we should be looking at with a little bit of alarm, and that is the tendency among Christian scholarship to be shifting towards the LXX chronology in terms of just considering young Earth and trying to claim, trying to do apologetic work against people who are claiming that the Bible's not true. I had to admit, when I'm doing my research for my Serpent by the Way book, it would make so many things so much easier if I just accepted the LXX, because the LXX does what you would expect somebody to do if they're trying to revise history to make it easier and more compatible with the world's history, and that's just push everything back to before their chronologies. So it pushes the flood and the Tower of Babel and the genealogies that the Bible talks about back to the era before Egypt's chronologies, which are the oldest in the world at that time. The Sumerian Kings List is not known at that time. That's an archaeological find from later. But they're going to have Kings lists of Babylon from Berosus that are going to be about the same age as the Kings list of Manetho, which is largely based on the Turin canon, which was made in the New Kingdom under Ramses II. So we look at these things and we go, well, okay, if they've got these Kings lists going back this far, and we've got to pick between the Masoretic text, which would radically disagree with this prevailing history. And remember, Egypt is considered the oldest and best record-keeping society in the world. They keep surviving in their priesthoods through all these transitions because whoever takes over, they adapt to the Egyptian culture rather than just destroy everything. They have a reverence for the Egyptian culture. These great monumental pyramids and things that they have leads to people wanting to become Egyptian. Same thing happens in China when it gets taken over by outsiders. There's just this endurance to this culture that makes the incomers want to become Egyptian rather than just destroy everything and transplant it with their own culture. And so you find, whether they're Libyans or Cushites or Assyrians or Persians or Greeks or Romans, they're largely showing some reverence for the Egyptian culture, and they don't want to just destroy it. So surprise, surprise, by the time you get to the era where the LXX is written, which is not the 3rd century, it's after the Maccabean takeover, you find the Alexandrian Jews, whoever is writing this LXX, wanting to compatibilize with the Manetho's Egyptica, which is based on the Turin's Kings list. Well, these Kings lists, when you look at them, and again, your average Jew back then wouldn't have had access to these Kings lists. We have them archaeologically now. We know that we have like 5 different Kings lists before the Turin's Kings list that don't agree with it. It's the same thing with the Sumerian Kings list. When we look at the other Kings lists we find around the region with the Sumerian Kings list, it's not like they made up the Sumerian Kings list out of thin air. It's that the chronology doesn't line up with the other Kings lists in the surrounding region. It's really bad when Christians who have one Bible that disagrees with those lists, the Sumerian Kings list and the Turin's Kings list, default towards believing in the secular thing when the surrounding region and the other Kings lists don't. It's really bad when Christians say, oh yeah, we'll agree with it. Why? Because you're just agreeing with mainstream secular academia. That's why. That's what they're doing. And so I just want to show you guys some things in the Sumerians Kings list, and then we want to jump to the LXX, just to show you how absurd it is on its face, because and I'm saving this for another video when I try to do this more thoroughly and say here's how I think it's meant to line up, because here's all I think they did for the Sumerians Kings list. I think the Sumerians and the Akkadians were mostly the Sumerians though, were digging up archaeology from the Eden region after the flood. I think a lot of these cities they went to recover these cities after the flood. They did on purpose. They did relatively quickly, and so they go uncover these cities to rebuild them, because why? You have a civilization there. You have irrigation. You have administration, you have buildings, all this stuff that would have survived, or at least its foundation survived, and it just saves you a bunch of work of doing it all over again. And so they're going to dig up all these cities, and then a lot of these cities are going to have kings lists in them. And most of these kings lists are what I believe to be different claims of rule during the period where war would break out, which seems to have started about 2 to 250 years before the flood, and it just continues to go back and forth. So it's not surprising to have a whole bunch of people claiming the rule or claiming to be the main government, but what would be surprising is to have it be a nice long list of succession. Then this guy was in charge, then this guy was in charge. And I want you guys to just look at the list and just see how absurd this sounds on its face. Because if we look at this Sumerians Kings list, I mean, never mind the mythological this, right? And I know if somebody wants to pin this in the comments, I know somebody who was here, they said that these SARs are actually representing days, and they break it down to what sounds more plausible. If somebody wants to do that math and put it in the comment section, I will pin that there. I don't know if I agree with that conclusion though, and here's why. Somebody showed that to me, and most of these seem to be reigns of up to like 150 years. And since the, and then it says then the flood swept over. Since this is supposed to be the pre-flood world, and it actually aligns at least chronologically to the biblical. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys, and then this guy is the father of Utnapishtim, which is their Noah. It's the Sumerian Noah. That's off by the biblical number of generations by 1 generation. Okay. Not only that, you have a 7th guy named Enmendurana, and I learned this from the Scott at Black Sheep. And he was supposedly taken up into heaven to learn the arts of divination and stuff like this, okay? So you have a 7th guy who's taken up to heaven, like Enoch is taken up to heaven, and then you basically have a difference of 1 generation, because in the Bible you have Melchizedek, then Lamech, then Noah. Here you just have 1 generation until they're Noah, okay? So it's whatever this is a list that kind of is reminiscent of the biblical list, which suggests that whoever cobbled this together, and I do think it's a forgery, was trying to line up with the genealogy that everyone had memorized. Okay, this gives a lot of credibility to the Bible, because what you have is everybody in the ancient world, and you're going to find this in India, you're going to find this in Egypt, in Assyria. You're going to have these, it's in Iran too, you're going to have this list of guys who ruled this ancient kingdom, and they're usually like very old guys. They're people who live much longer, and then you have the flood. And they don't always mark the flood, but you just have this ancient mythological genealogy, but it's always around 10 people. This one, again, is 9 if you count Utnapishtim, so it might range between, let's say, 8 and 12, but it's always around 10 people. And the reason I think you have that is because you once had a common oral memory of 10 people who lived very long, who were there before the flood. And that speaks to very loudly to the Masoretic text and to people who, want to make these claims that it's like, oh, this was just symbolizing this or that. I don't think so. If it was just symbolizing this or that, why would that be all that anybody remembers? Because remember, that would mean that Shem, Ham, and Japheth are giving this list of 10 guys to their kids. And even after the Tower of Babel, the names might change and the meanings of the names might change. Because what you're having is people breaking down a name to its meaning, and then that's shifting with the language changes. But you have something that is reflecting this number of generations. These guys live a lot longer than we do, and then the flood came, okay? And so the reason why this, years as days theory doesn't work for me is because it goes from this to jump forward to people who are 1,200 years and 960 years, and that doesn't make sense to me if these guys are living to be up to like 150 years, and then you jump to 1,200 years, okay? So I don't. That's an interesting theory. I just don't find it that persuasive for that reason. Okay, but anyways, we see these guys here, and we see this pre-flood era. We also know that this Utnaptishtim is in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Okay, and this is his father in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and so he is meant to be the one guy that survives a flood, and you have Gilgamesh meeting him. Okay. Now, I don't think this is true that Gilgamesh met this guy. I think when they write the Epic of Gilgamesh, they're trying to blend Amraphel going over and destroying all these giants in Canaan with a pre-flood story of a guy named Gilgamesh of Uruk, who I think was a real guy. But look where they put Gilgamesh, okay? Remember, Gilgamesh is supposed to meet this Utnaptishtim, who's the son of this guy, okay? You go all of these thousands of years, and then these guys who are 324 years down to 36 years, so you have post-flood era reigns. And then you go all the way down the second dynasty of Kish, all the way down here. Here's Lugal Zagazi. And then, oops, did I skip Gilgamesh? So it's after this long dynasty of Kish that then you have Gilgamesh down here with Enmerkar, who is supposed to be... Enmerkar is supposed to be the founder of Uruk. Now this would make sense if if Uruk has some kind of list, and Enmerkar is the founder of the city, and you have the guy before him whose name is Son of Utu. So this would be like an Adam figure. Remember, Adam and Eve kept having other sons and daughters after Cain and Abel, right? So this Meshkian-Gasher of Iana is Uruk. It's the temple of Inanna in Uruk. This is supposedly the first ruler, and then Enmerkar establishes the city. Well, that would make sense if this is a later son of Adam. Okay? And when you look at your map of where these cities are, here's here's Uruk. Now, just means the town. And my guess is this is the original town of Adam. Eridu is named after Gerid, which is the father of Enoch, and he's like, I think he's born like 500 years after Adam. Makes sense that they would be close. It's also the original seat of government based on the antediluvian records we have. Larsa is where Utu is first deified, and Utu is the sun god, and they seem to make Yahweh into a sun god because of him coming down in the cool of the evening, okay? So this all makes sense that this is tight, this is close. Uruk is going to be where they deify Inanna, who seems to be the mother of the Nephilim. And this makes sense that Gilgamesh would be here, because Gilgamesh is a Nephilim. He's a giant. Bad Tibara is where they deify Dumuzid, who seems to be based on Abel. Abel is... Dumuzid means son of life. Eve's name means life, so she would be Eve's son. And then they have the mourning for Tammuz that we find later in the Bible, who's Dumuzid, and Abel means mourning. So it all makes sense that it ties in that. I'm not saying whether or not Dumuzid was his original name. Maybe his original name was mourning because God knew he was going to die or whatever. I don't know. Or maybe they called him Abel after he died. Either way, You have two cities that are close together where Dumuzid and Inanna are merged together as a couple. Dumuzid is the youngling shepherd. The original lists we have of Inanna actually has Enlil, Ninlil, Nana, and Inanna. It doesn't have Dumuzid on it. The marrying of Dumuzid and Inanna seems to happen later, possibly post-flood. Okay, so so you have basically the sun god, and then he's supposed to be these are post-flood pantheons, but he's supposed to be the sister to her. And then you have Enlil and Ninlil, which are basically like a counterfeit God the Father and God the Holy Spirit. And they're worshipped up here in Nippur. Now, that's a long ways away when you look at this. Over here, we have Gersu, where we have... let's see if we can make this bigger. We have Gersu, which is the town of, I believe, is Tubal-Cain. It's known to have metal, brass, and copper idols, where other ones will have, if it's any metal, it's silver, because it's soft and easy to work with and abundant. And so you have Gersu, where the Lord of the Plow is, Nin-Gersu, okay? Lagash means shining milk, and that's the first guy to start a war. That seems to be a Canaanite city. Uruk-ag, I think one of these two cities is where Ningashada starts to be worshipped, which is the serpent. And all this makes sense because Cain settled east of Eden. That's where he builds his first city. Now, we don't know where that city is. We do know Uruk actually is Unug, which sounds more like Enoch. And so that might be the city where Enoch actually descended from, but his temple is in Eridu, and that's where his father is, and that makes sense. His father's going to outlive him for hundreds of years because he is translated, and it makes sense that he would have a memorial to his son. So these are the main Canaanite regions, so it makes sense that the Canaanites would go up the Tigris and migrate up there, and then back here into... this is Iran, but this is Elam, basically towards the Afghanistan where you get tin from. It makes sense that the guys who are working in metal and bronze first are beelining towards the tin, and then they're also going to start civilizations in Iran because those are two ways that you can get towards that tin, okay? While the sons of Seth are going to go up the Euphrates River, and then they're eventually going to go down into Egypt and things like this. But when we look at the transitions in the Mari Kings list... because we want to pan this out. We want to understand that this is all in the very southern part of Iraq. This would be like Iraq, and this is Kuwait down here, and this is lower Iraq. This is Iran. When you get up here towards Mari, that is going to be in Syria, way up in Syria. When you get towards this Hamazi up here, that's going to be way up in Iran. So when we look at this king's list... if we just look at the transitions of where the government transitions to, and I realize they're adding thousands and hundreds of years to this, but what you'd want to do is imagine this is like war breaks out in like 250 years before the flood, and it just consumes the earth in violence to the point where God destroys the earth in the flood. So what we should be looking for is a bunch of claimants to power and a bunch of fighting going on, not this thousands and thousands of years of just peaceful transitionary government. Now, this, I think, was based on something that they found that was a king's list that matches the number of genealogies to Adam, and so I think they kept it. And then I think they made up this Etana myth about this guy going up into heaven because he was the seventh and he matches Enoch. And so I think they were looking for something that was meant to match what they knew, and so that's why they put this here. This Elulim could have been just a later son of Adam, and it just goes down the line. But Dumuzid, they seem to have wedged in here because they're Dumuzid, the shepherd, and then you see Inanna here. There's something going on here. They're trying to match this cult of Dumuzid and Inanna, which seems to be put together after the flood. And the original pair seems to be Nana and Inanna. Nana is the bull of heaven, and it's based on the moon god, and Inanna is the lady of the heaven, and she seems to be the one who's impregnated by them. But they make up this myth of Dumuzid and Inanna, and Dumuzid being compared to a bull, and then Inanna going down to try to sleep with him in the underworld. because I think they know she's the mother of the Nephilim. And so they're trying to make a story around the time that the Nephilim took place that makes sense, and they just wedge him in there. Okay, so that's where you have Dumuzi there. And then you have somebody else who's doing this down here. This is why you notice you have Dumuzi around the same place. Here Dumuzi is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here Dumuzi is 1, 2, 3, 4. And Gilgamesh seems to be the first Nephilim, or at least one of the first Nephilim. Uruk seems to be where it starts. It's also one of the areas close to where they suspect Neanderthals and humans started mating. And we look at, these and Merkur is supposed to be the founder not only of the city, but also of cuneiform. He's supposed to be the guy who invents it. And they're going to invent a tale about him after the Tower of Babel called In Merkur and the Lord of Arada, where he is involved with, reuniting the supply chain between the Japhethites and the Sumer to get the lapis lazuli and things that they need for their temples. And he seems to become Mercury. En just means like priest ruler. And so the Merkar becomes Mercury, and he becomes the messenger of the gods because he invents the language. Just like Thoth seems to invent Egyptian hieroglyphics, and he becomes the messenger of the gods. And then Hermes becomes the messenger of gods because that's Ham, and Ham is helping everybody translate everything. Lugalbanda gets deified, and you see how he lives 1,200 years, and these guys are 300, 400, and then he's 1,200 years. He gets deified, so he's treated as a god. And then Dumuzi is the same Dumuzi that Inanna has him, and the reason is because they want to make him the father of Gilgamesh, because they have Inanna sleeping with Dumuzi, or trying to sleep with Dumuzi after he's dead, and the Nephilim are based on people who had children with deceased deified loved ones. Okay, so that seems to be what they're trying to do. But if we just look at the count there, and let's take out Dumuzi here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Something similar to the Bible. That's what you have in Uruk too. And so if we take out Dumuzi, and other stories make Gilgamesh the son of Lugalbanda, so that would make sense to us. You basically have Lugalbanda has a son. Why is he counted as Lugalbanda's son? Well, he doesn't have to be his son. He could be, it says, whose father was a phantom. So his father is a ghost. This is what their records say. And then this is the fisherman whose city was Kurara. He was taken captive by the single hand of Enmagar Bagasi. So Dumuzi here could just be some other guy that died, and they merge him with Abel, but he's just some other guy that died. So it looks like we have this really unbelievable list here of this first dynasty of Kish, a kind of believable one that has 9 guys, and then a kind of believable one that has 11 guys, but we could take one of them out as added in. So we see people in these two cities. This mentions a few places. It says Iridug, Lurag, Shurapag, and it doesn't say that somebody was defeated, and Bad Tabaro, okay? So we see these 4 cities. This is Sippur, and this is Shurapak. And if we look at these in our map, we see Iridug is Eridu. Bad Tabaro is right here. Lorag is Lorak, that's right here. And Shurapak is right here. So they're saying the government moved to these 4 places. It just says they fell. Okay? Well, why would you have 4 falls of government? You wouldn't. But what you would have is the population increase and moving upriver. So it would make sense that the government is just moving upriver as the population is growing to a place that's more central. It makes a lot of sense. And it seems to end up here at Kish. Okay, that seems to be the main place it ends up before the flood. And that's where they try to make it after the flood. And that's where Sargon takes over. So this huge list at Kish here is probably completely made up, because all these names and this first half of it are Akkadian. So we know, well, Sargon of Akkad takes over Kish to start his empire. He's making it up. They're making up Akkadian names to make this list seem longer. Why are they doing that? I don't know. But then we see Atana in this list, and this is their version of Enoch. and he gets translated up in the sky. So the myth of Etana, the shepherd who ascended into heaven and consolidated all the foreign countries. So notice you have all the made up stuff, and then you have Etana starting this. So if we take off the made up stuff, how many names do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11. The exact same number that we have in Uruk. So what are these lists? This is probably the original transition of government until it gets to Kish. This is all completely made up. And then this is the ages are made up, but this is the list of governors that goes towards Kish. And what I have in my theory, and this is just based on the math of the Masoretic text, is that the government moves to Kish after Enoch is translated. And it just so happens they have this myth of Etana being taken up into heaven and consolidating all the countries. And then you have the government at Kish with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, the same amount as the flood, or the same amount as the Genesis record. So chop out all this. This is nonsense. They just made that up. Or it's another list that they found and they just slapped the two together. Like maybe it's a different language, or it's, this is the Canaanite version and this is the Sethite version, and they just slapped the two together. But what you have is a government in Kish after this guy ascends into heaven. And what it seems to be is whenever they put a government list, they put the whole genealogy there. They're not just putting the government list there. And so we see Aga of Kish fighting Gilgamesh way down here at the end of this one. But Gilgamesh is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this one. And you're going to keep seeing this. Is they are putting the whole genealogy, but this guy fought this guy. Well, it would make sense if you go, okay, there's not, 3,000 years between them. This is the whole genealogy down to Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh and Aga of Kish fight at some point in time. And maybe the government does go from Kish to Uruk after these guys fight. And it makes sense. If you got a Nephilim guy who's big and strong and he wants to take over because we're fighting the Canaanites now, makes sense that this guy might overthrow the other government. But the point is this is their whole government down to the flood. This is their whole government down to the flood. And at some point in time, they fight. Okay? So what we have in other archaeological records is this guy named Meselam of Kish who tries to settle a border dispute between Canaanites and Sethites over Gu Eden, which is the border of Eden. And you have these two cities, Uma and Lagash, who are at the center of the fight. So here's Uma here and here's Lagash, and notice there's Girsu in the middle of them. So that's where I believe Tubal-Cain was. And the government is in Kish, so Kish mediates this dispute with them. And then Lagash claims Uma violates the dispute, and rather than going to Kish, they go to Girsu, and they get told by Ningirsu, who I believe is the living Tubal-Cain, that Enlil wants them to go to war. And it just so happens to be that, Tubal-Cain is the increase of Cain, and he's the metal crafting guy, and he's probably making their weapons, okay? Him and all his guild or whatever. So war's breaking out here, and there's a Meselam of Kish who is trying to mediate, who I believe is Mahalalel, because Mahalalel would have been the oldest descendant of Adam in the line of Enoch when Enoch was translated. Okay, but Meselam is not mentioned in this whole nothing. We have like 4 dynasties of Kish, and Meselam is not mentioned, even though we have this famous stele regarding him, and that seems to be when the war breaks out. So it seems like he'd be substantial, but he's not in there. Now, possibly he is Melem. That's possible, and that's the same as Meselam, but you see these guys saying this is the son of him, this is the son of him, this is the son of him, but they're also claiming, his son takes over for 1,200 years after this guy rules for 1,500 years. It doesn't make sense unless you expect that what these guys are saying, because it says the flood swept over, and it says after the flood had swept over, the kingship had descended from heaven, and the kingship was in Kish. What they're trying to claim is that these people were gods, and the flood swept over, and then these people are descending from heaven, and so these people are more divine, and that's why they live so long. which is similar to what the Bible says, but it's different because they're counting them as gods instead of just people who live longer and God shortening the ages. So now we go over to Uruk, and again, we see about 10 generations. Then we go to Ur, which is, I believe, the first town, and we just see 4 guys there. And then it says it's taken to Awan. Now, I want you to see where they're saying it's taken from. For some reason, they're saying that the government was taken from here, from Kish right here, to Uruk right here, to Ur right here, all the way over here. Why? Why would they move the government? First of all, that's Canaanite territory. But if the Canaanites defeated these guys, why would they have the government way back here? Doesn't make sense. So you would want the center of government somewhere where you could maintain control, and you have a big city there and a lot of economics going on there, and you could house a lot of military there so that you could help hold everything down. So you'd want it up close here. So then it says it's taken from Awan, and it's just there under 3 kings for 356 years, but we don't have their names. And then it goes all the way back to Kish. So it goes from Awan all the way back to Kish. Well, why? If these are Canaanite cities, how did they get all the way to here and sack the government and bring it back to here? It doesn't make sense. But if you understand these as competing claims of government. Remember, I said there's about 250 years of fighting before the flood, and they're claiming 356 years. And they're just systematically digging up all these cities as they're fighting them, and they're reading records of other cities that they're trading with, and then going to where those are and digging up those cities and fighting them. Well, they're finding their records. And this record has 3 people here. And this person's claiming the rule from, surprise, surprise, Kish. Okay? So then it says, then Kish was defeated and it was taken to Hamazi. So they're saying it went from here to here and then all the way up here. Then these guys took it over. Like, why? Why so far back? Why would it be so far back? That makes no sense. They would be right on the front lines. So, why would they sack this government and then take the government all the way back here? Makes no sense. So then it's going to go from Hamazi right back to Uruk again. Why? Again, notice another convenient time, like 360 years. So we have 356 years and 360 years. Well, what do I think these are? I think these are people who claimed independence for about 350 years, which makes sense. They're far away from Mesopotamia, and they had a completely independent government, and that they were not going to submit to the government of Kish because they're far away, and they both are about 360 years old. Then you get to these guys. Now, remember I said there's about 250 years of war, and you see Uruk here, and you see 6127. Okay, now remember this earlier list had 10 guys in here. What is this? Well, this could be a later government. This could be another dynasty claiming we should be in charge. But notice he says he's contemporary with Entemena of Lagash. Now, Lagash isn't recorded here, but we're going to find these people. Kugbao is contemporary with Ananatum of Lagash. Okay, notice this is 100 years later. Notice this is about 200 years later total right here. This is 90 years later. And then we have, keep going back, we have another 180 years. So we're like 500 years between Entemena and Eanatum. So if we go look at these guys, because they have a king's list too. It's not in the Sumerians' king's list, but they have a king's list. They're father and son. So you're talking about this, and not that you couldn't have 500 years between a father and son in the pre-flood era, but this is the government that starts the war. And all of these guys are listed after the war starts, which is around 2600 BCE. Notice how these guys are dated. They're dated because we know about this war that happened. And we have destruction layers that prove that this war happened. And then we have these guys in succession. And so we have basically, it's this Eonatum that starts the war. So you have Eonatum the first, Entemena, Eonatum the second, Entaarzi, Lugolanda, Urukagina, and then it seems to fall apart. And this is leading you, when does it fall apart? Everything keeps falling apart around the, within about 50 years of the flood. So we see the last guy leading this place, the transition is 2368, the flood's around 2300. We have the last guy there. And then we don't have a transition after that. Do you know why? Because the flood happened. This is what we have over and over. When we look at the individual kings list over and over and over and over and over again, we find somewhere around 2300, or within 50 years of that, a last king. And your secular archaeologists will look at this and be like, oh, because that's because there was this big drought worldwide that caused all these different civilizations to collapse around 2200, which doesn't make sense that the last king recorded is 150 years before that. It makes sense if these guys live a long time and it's 50 years before that, but 150 years before that doesn't make any sense, okay? But the point that I'm making here is when we look at all this is like a handful of generations. And remember, there's a lot of war, so you probably have these kings dying too. But you have a handful of generations over the course of about 250 years before the flood, which makes sense with long-lived kings. If you compare that to the Sumerian kings list, there's Eonatum, or Enanatum the first, and way up here is Entemana. And how do we know? Because they mention each other in their lists, okay? So Kugbao seems to be the last ruler of, notice it's 24th century BCE. She's a woman bartender. That's literally who's in charge of the government now. What ends up happening is this Uruk ends up defeating, I think, Elam. And we don't have this in this list, but Uma defeats Lagash. And then they go back to, they basically have this military government because they're all united against the Canaanites. And then after the Canaanites are defeated, the Sethites declare independence again. And so that's why you have a lot of these second dynasty of Ur, the third dynasty of Adab. You have these people with just one ruler, is because they're all just declaring independence at the end. And the last one of Kish seems to be Kugbao. So you see 24th century. Remember, 24th century is 2300s, 2303. Between 2303 and 2350 is when the flood would be, based on your chronological disparities, okay? Based on the Masoretic text. But notice we have Eonatum the first and Entemana of Lagash. So here we have 500 years between them. Here we have Eonatum the first, and Entemana is just right before him. He's the guy right before him. So we're just looking at the pre-flood stuff, and we know we can line up this guy with this as contemporaries. So all this stuff they're putting in between, these are contemporary lists whose guys are, again, this is the government going all the way up to Mari, which is way up here, which seems to be like a crafting and smithing capital for the Sethites. Maybe they ruled for a time or took the government when one of these governments fell and kind of led them back to counter and fight back over here. But we certainly don't have them ruling for all this time. What we have in Mari is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys, which makes sense as if it was established later, because you're going to have, it's in the 5th generation that Tubal-Cain starts to get his metallurgy skills going. And these guys, Mari seems to be a competitive crafting capital for the Sethites. And so if we added 5 generations to this, we'd have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 generations. Makes sense. So this is the whole rule of Mari. And this seems to be the region where Noah and his family probably were before they go up into, because this is right by the Haran region. So this seems to be where Noah and his family would have been before they went up to Van. They seem to be backing away from the area that's getting defeated by the Canaanites. And then these guys make a comeback because Uruk has Nephilim. And so they start fighting back. And then once Uruk defeats them, Then you have the Canaanite dynasty or Canaanite government pushed back to Akshak. And notice that we have here contemporary with Cugbao of Kish. So this person, even though they're fourth in this dynastic list, they're contemporary with this person, who is contemporary with the son of this person. So we just know by comparing the people who are mentioned in each other's lists that this is not a stack. This is all lined up. These are a bunch of people that are ruling or co-ruling or claiming rule next to each other. But whoever cobbles this list together keeps going, and then this one was defeated, and then the next one goes. Which is basically the same thing that happens in Egypt with the New Kingdom. They take the 7 nations of Egypt and they just stack them on top of each other and make it look like one big long dynasty, even though you could just take one of them and go, oh, that kind of matches the period from Abraham down to Joseph coming, or down to Jacob and Joseph coming in the Masoretic text perfectly. And your pro-LXX, I'm going to call it older young earth people, are going to look at this without criticism and go, yeah, that's believable. That's believable. We'll slap Abraham somewhere around here. And that makes no sense. Like, we know these are usurpers. We know these are people who claimed power who shouldn't have had it, and then they fought wars. It stands to reason that they're going to make propaganda. We also know that the grandson of Sargon is going to claim to be a god. So he's an antichrist. What does the antichrist do? He changes times and laws, aka he rewrites history. He makes fake news, right? Because he's trying to justify himself. And so we see all this stuff down here in Akshak, just so you know, there's probably a backup government of Cain, but it gets dug up after the flood because Suan here is Sin, the son of Canaan, and he seems to his people seem to be leading the digging up, and so all these people after him, because notice they're saying Puzur Nuwa is contemporary with Cugbao. I think that's the last one before the flood, and I think they dig it up after the flood, and Ishu'il and Su Shuen are probably the people who are involved with it, and Su Shuen means hand of Sin. So Sin would by this time be ruling at afterwards, and he's not conquering anybody or anybody. They're just digging up these cities and they're establishing a new government over them. And he's in which seems to be the center of this Hamite government. And he seems to, the northernmost city he has is Akshak, which probably used to be a Canaanite backup capital because it's up, notice you see Larak and then Akshak, they're all up the Euphrates. Here's Lagash down here. Larak, Ashak. It makes sense that they're moving their governmental seats up here, upriver, as they're backing off from the fighting because they're losing. Okay? But what happens after the flood is you have here, you have Kish here in the middle, and then you have Akshak here in the north, and that basically takes you from the Persian Gulf all the way up to this is where the Assyrians are. And that makes sense that would be Sin's government before Nimrod takes over. And then Nimrod is going to take over by sacking Kish, the Ur-Zababa of Kish. That's who Sargon defeats. And then after that, you're going to have him have a puppet government in Larsa. That's in the Bible down here. He takes over all of this. And then he claims he marches up and he's going to take Mari after that. And then his grandson is going to invade, that's Amraphel, and he's going to invade Canaan. And so we're going to see some really telling signs of this. And I cover all this in my Serpent by the Way book, but I just want to show you guys this. So if all this is pre-flood, and then we have this as something that's dug up after the flood, and somewhere around here is post-flood, we also have Puzur Swen here. Notice it's not this government being defeated and taking to Kish. Remember, these guys are making up this list afterwards. That's the hand of Sin, and here, this guy's name means protected by Sin, and then if we go all the way down here to the Ur-3 period, which is way down here, we have another guy named Su Shuen in okay? So if the center of the government is at Kish, it makes sense that you have a guy named protected by Sin. By this time, Sin is deified. And then on the one end of his government, you have a guy named Hand of Sin. And then on the other end of his government, you have a guy named Hand of Sign. So in the northernmost city under Sign's government, you have Sushwin. And the southernmost city of that, you have Sushwin. You have this guy before him named Amar Swena, which seems to be, that's the deified father of the Amorites. That's the deified father of the Sinites. And they definitely are united. And this is going to turn into the Amorite kingdom after Sargon is overthrown. This Nama is Nama. It's actually the mother of all the living. It's Noah's wife Nama. And means servant. So the original meaning of seems to be town. But as people had an expansive government, their vassals, their title would be town of this other person. Okay? And so Uri turns into the name for servant or vassal. Because what you're saying is this town is under the authority of that person. And because you're the town's leader, you're the Uru of this town. And so Uru or turns into a word that means servant or vassal. Okay? So Nama, if this is their common mother, they're digging up what might have been her original hometown. And so it makes sense that the first ruler of that is serving Noah's wife. This is all this is before Noah dies. Makes sense she might have some nostalgia and want to dig up her own hometown where she came from. Because Noah and her were basically the descendants of, let's see here. Noah is the descendant of Jared and Enoch. Remember, he's the great-grandson of Enoch. So they're at Eridu here. And she's the sister of Tubal-Cain, who's at Gersu right here. So it makes sense they would have gotten married and lived around here, but then when the wars started breaking out, they move up here. Okay? And then they eventually move to where the ark is built. Okay? Remember, they're 600 years old by the time the ark is built. So it's a long, long time. So it makes sense that she might want to reestablish her hometown, which is the original city of Adam. They're all descended from Adam. Okay? And so the first ruler there is Nama. So do I think this 3 period is way down here? No, I don't. I think this is all propaganda. There is no 2 period. It just doesn't exist. They just make it up out of thin air. We have a 5th dynasty of Uruk, which is just one guy named Utu-Henegal, who supposedly defeats these Gutians, these are the Japhethites who overthrow Sargon's empire. And notice how they're all ruling 6 years, 5 years, 3 years, 1 year, 2 years, the longest are 7 years. Why? Because they're not establishing a dynasty here. These are military governors who are serving a term. They're keeping things down because they had to overthrow Sargon, because probably Shem and Japheth got together and says, we need to put this guy's government down. But if we go all the way down to where it happens, Ur-Zababa is the guy that Sargon overthrows. So why is Sargon way down here 200 years later? Doesn't make sense. Now, Ur-Zababa lives to be 400 years, and that would make sense if he's a son of Cush. Because Cush lives to be 400 years, and the sons after him would be about 400 years. Ur-Zababa means servant of Father Saba, which is Cush's oldest son. Puzur-Sin means protected by Sign, which is Canaan's second or third youngest son. So we see all this stuff matching. If we understand this is all contemporary, then we see Lugal-Zaghazi of the 3rd dynasty of Uruk, and they have him right here exactly after the flood. Do I believe this is exactly after the flood? No, I do not. What it may be, it may be a guy who's establishing this city of Lagash and has dug it up after the flood. And this is the guy that Sargon overthrows. Well, notice he said his father was a gardener. The cupbearer of Ur-Zababa became king, whose father was a gardener, the cupbearer of Ur-Zababa. So it could have been his father that was the cupbearer of Ur-Zababa. But we have other stuff that talks about how Ur-Zababa had a dream that he was going to kill him, so he tried to kill him, and that's what led to Sargon taking him over, which seems to be Sargon's propaganda. He said he became king, the king of a god who built a god. Okay? And he defeats Lugal-Zaghazi. Now, what seems to happen is Lugal-Zaghazi either is a complete mythological figure or not mythological, but a pre-flood figure that Sargon is claiming to defeat this guy to take over rule. But what he claims to do is he claims to attack this guy for destroying the sacred city of Gersu. Here's the problem. Gersu would have only been a sacred city to the Canaanites, so nobody after the flood would have thought it was a sacred city. The god Ningersu, or Lord of the Plow, is going to be who Sargon merges with to become Ninurta, okay? After he's dead. That they merge him with, he's Lugal Marad, which Marad is right up here. So he's Lugal Marad, and they merge him with Gersu to become Ninurta, okay? But what Sargon seems to do is he seems to usurp the rule of the fourth dynasty of Kish. These guys who are after him are basically puppet rulers. And then if Lugal Zaghazi is a post-flood guy, he is claiming an offense from before the flood, which you would have had in the cuneiform tablets about wars that are taking place before the flood. And on behalf of a Canaanite city that is destroyed before the flood, he's claiming to act in vengeance. And so he uses that as a pretense to go sack Uruk. Now this matches perfectly with what the Bible says, because it says the beginning of his city says the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, which by the time Moses is writing this, Kish isn't really known to anybody, but Babel would have been right near Kish, and that would have been known to everybody because that was the seat of world government until the Tower of Babel fell. And then after that is Erech, which is he defeats Uruk. And then Akkad, which is where he sets up his capital after that. So you see the order is exactly this. If you just count Kish as Babylon, Kish, Uruk, Akkad. He builds Akkad as his capital after he subdues Kish and Uruk, which is exactly what the Bible says. And then Calna, which it's called Kalhu, and I don't think that's in here. And I forget exactly where it is, but I think it's like over here. So he is building a government, and this is what he's doing. He sacks this, but he keeps vassal rulers in place. He sacks this, and then he puts his daughter Enhenduada as the high priestess here. So this doesn't ever seem to come back as a capital because he's going to make Larsa his capital. And then he sets up Akkad as his city. So notice Akkad, they don't know exactly where it is, but they think it's somewhere up here. And then he is going to, and then he's going to rule from Akkad through Kish, through Larsa down in the south, and those are going to be his governmental cities. And then after that, we know he takes them into Elam to go fight Elam and subdue them. And then, or no, I'm sorry, it's going to be his son Manishtushu, I think, that does Elam. And then the next thing we see is Uruk re-emerging after his government falls. Okay? Which makes sense, but we want to look at what happens during his reign. Okay, now, during the reigns of Sargon, Ramush, Manishtushu, and Naram-Sin, what they're going to do is Sargon is going to go up into Assyria and build 3 cities there, which is exactly what the Bible says. It says he went out of that land to Ashur, and he built Nineveh and Rehoboth and Calah. These are 3 cities on the upper Tigris, which he's going to build. And if you look at the Assyrians' kings list, they say that their kings lived in tents before that. And then this guy is going to come build cities, okay? Akshak would have been the northernmost city, but that would have been at the south of Assyria. So it doesn't say what he does with Akshak, but he builds these bigger, more prominent cities in Assyria, and he seems to, without a battle, take over Assyria because he's basically controlling the cities and the trade there. So it's not like he's out to, these are basically Bedouin shepherds up there. It's not like he's out to just go kill the Bedouin shepherds, and they're not out to kill him for building cities in their region, okay? So he builds these cities there. And then he is going to place, you're going to see, notice this says 2270. You're going to see Sargon in the Syrians' kings list around 1920 BCE. So 250 years after this. Now this all makes perfect sense when you go, yeah, it would have been about 250 years after the flood until they had enough people to go around digging up all these cities. But he's trying to kick the flood way back here into, 100,000 years in the past. and then claim that he's descended from a long line of governments that keep getting usurped. And so usurping is just a normal thing, and I'm just the latest guy to usurp. You know, this is just what happens. This is the will of the gods. The tablets of destiny proclaim that whoever's the strongest is supposed to you take over the government and rule. And I'm doing that. And the way you prove it is that the people are more prosperous, and we're expanding cities and irrigation and stuff like that, and expanding civilization. Therefore, the gods have blessed us. That sound like anything that you hear of today? Yeah, this is the whole basis of the modern capitalists overthrowing their kings and saying, hey, we produce more for people through this capitalism system, so therefore we're just to overthrow the rulers. And it just so happens we call it manifest destiny, just like they called it the tablets of destiny. Okay, it's the same thing. So he's overthrowing it. His son Ramush is going to be put in charge of the whole government after him, while his son Manishtushtu seems to be put in charge of Assyria. And so we're going to see in the Syrians' kings list after Sargon, a guy named Puzur-Ashur, protected by Ashur. And so by this time, Ashur's dead. He's deified. And Manishtushtu is basically given a title as if the dead, divine, deified Ashur has blessed his rule over Assyria. Okay? And then after him in the Assyrians' kings list is going to be Naram-Sin. And the reason is because Manishtushtu is going to overthrow his brother Ramush, which we find Puzur-Ashur leaving the role in 8 years. This is 9 years when Ramush is overthrown. And then we see Naram-Sin in charge of Assyria for, I think, like 56 years. It's like the same amount of time. So this matches perfectly with the Assyrians' kings list. You just have to pull it all forward 250 years and not listen to the propaganda. And then what happens is Naram-Sin is going to be Amraphel. And Amraphel means in Hebrew, he says he's the face of God. And Naram-Sin deifies himself and starts depicting himself with bullhorns. Sargon's name means, Ninmarad means master of Marad, which is a city where he's deified. Makes sense. So we've, and then it's Shar-Kali-Shari when the government starts falling apart. So that's Naram-Sin's son. So Naram-Sin, if you line this up with the Assyrians' kings list, he takes power 3 years before Abraham fights Naram-Sin over Lot. Or Amraphel, when he fights Amraphel over Lot. And by the time he fights Amraphel is the king of Shinar, so that would match Naram-Sin. And he has a king of Elasar with him, so that matches their puppet kings in Larsa, which are kicked off this list. And then he has the king of Elam with him, and Elam is defeated by his father Manishtushtu, so that would make them vassals. And then he has this guy named Tidal, king of the Goyim. Okay? And I believe Tidal, king of the Goyim, because these guys are Semites primarily. I think, I'm sorry, their kingdom is primarily Semites because that's where Akkad is. It's in the Semitic territory. I think Sargon is probably half Cushite, half Sinite. And what they do is this title seems to be the Hittites. It seems to be a Hittite ruler that they're planning to make a vassal over Canaan when they invade it. And then they fail because of Abraham, and so the Hittites go off into Anatolia and they establish a empire there, basically. That's my theory, anyways. But the point is notice we have them taking. Sargon is taking Assyria and Sumer. Ramush doesn't take anything. He has revolts through his whole reign. Manishtushtu puts down those revolts and then takes Elam. And then Naram-Sin, Manishtushtu is also going to take Mari, which is up in Syria. And then Naram-Sin from Mari is going to launch an assault on Canaan. So pay attention to what they do. Now look what happens after this. We see Puzur-Swin, that was the original ruler of the government. And then Ur-Zababa, after Sin, it goes to Cush's son, Saba. And then I don't know who Zimudar is, and I don't know who Usi-Water is. But if you do the math, Eshtar Moody means Ishtar has died. This matches when Amraphel goes into Canaan and he destroys Ashtaroth Karnaim and kills all these Nephilim tribes, okay? Ashtaroth Karnaim seems to be where Ishara or Ashtoreth is making Nephilim babies. And she would have been a long-lived Canaanite woman, and she seems to die there. So the name is Ishtar has died. This is the first reference to Ishtar in any of these lists, except there's some weird reference in the Mari list. Oh, there's one way up here, NB Ishtar, which makes no sense. Okay? I think that's probably the wrong name. That's probably why it's in parentheses. But if we look at later lists here, and we, again, ignore the propaganda and just line them up, we see Ishtar Moody. Now we go down here. Remember, this would be lined up with this. And so Sargon sacks him. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 after him. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 after him, invading that. So if you just line these two up, Ishtar dies when he invades Canaan. That makes sense, okay? So if we line up ones that come after him, we go way down here. This is the Ison Kings list. And the Ison Kings list, Ison is going to be, and it says, independent Amorite states in Lower Mesopotamia, the dynasty of Larsa. So Ison and Larsa, notice the date, 1961 to 1674, okay? This is around the time that Abraham was born to around the time that Joseph goes into Egypt. This is that whole time. But if you just ignore the propaganda and you line it up, notice you have Ishbi Era, I don't know who that is. You have Shu Ilushu. Then you see Dagon twice. Dagon is the god of Mari. And Mari was occupied by Aramaeans, but it's later going to be occupied by Amorites. It also, before it's occupied by Amorites, is taken over by Naram-Sin. So if we go up here, or it's Naram-Sin's dad. And you notice Dagon starts going into their kings list. And if we line this up all the way up here, because remember, this is in the 1920s, we find Sargon, Ramush, and this guy takes Mari, the third guy in the list, and we find the third guy in the list start to have Dagon appear. What they do is they incorporate their gods into their list, and that's when they start to appear. And then we see Dagon twice, so 40 years where Dagon is honored, basically, in their kings list here. And then Ishtar. Remember, we saw Ishtar Moody after up here, where we go, Ishtar Moody. And then the next one is Ishmi Shamash, which means Shamash has heard. And that's when they, remember, after they invade these, Canaan and kill all these giants and probably kill Ashtra, that's when they take Lot and Abraham goes and fights them, and then he gets blessed by Melchizedek. Shamash, Shem has heard. So now Shem knows what's going on because they've invaded the land he lives in now. Okay? And it's after that notice you just have 1, 2 in the dynasty of Kish, and then it's gone. It's after that you would line that up with Naram-Sin, and you have 1, and then this falls apart within a generation. So what's happening? Shem's found out that these guys are taking over everything because the war has gotten him now. And him and Japheth get together, and Japheth sends the Gutians, which are the Goths, and he sends the Amorites and tells all the Semites to go rebel against this false rule, and they together start overthrowing everything. And so then you have these independent states, but notice, why are they using Dagon and Ishtar and then Ninurta? This is the deified Sargon. Because in this part, they're under the rule of Akkad. And then, once they're off the rule of Akkad, they go back to Suen, Sign, Enlil. Those are, so notice you got Enlil again, Sign again. Why? Because these are the gods, these are the people who they would have, remember, Enlil is their version of God the Father in Sumer, okay? Sign is their deified ancestor, Sign. So they go back to, if you just line this up with Sargon and then line this up with the period after Sargon, what it takes you to is, remember how Sargon, he's going to start his takeover up here in 1953. He's going to be the ruler of Akkad in 1920, or the ruler of Assyria in 1920. So if you just line this up with the Assyrians' kings list, you have Dagon is honored when he takes over Mari, and then you have Ishtar honored when they destroy Canaan. Why? Because the Canaanites, Ishtar's a famous woman among them. She's the mother of the Nephilim. And so then when Sargon is deified, you have Ninurta in here. And you have the same thing in the Larsa Kings list. And remember, we have Elisar in the Bible is the ancestry of Abraham. So here's Larsa. It's a pre-flood state. Remember, this is where Utu is first worshipped as a god. And we have these datings going from 2025. That's the start of it. Why? Well, that's 250 years after the flood. That's when they have enough people to start digging up these cities. So Sargon's Akkad list is BS propaganda, okay? And so we have all these people. Nur-Adad. Adad is supposedly the son of Dagon. So this is an Amorite. These people are Sinites who are married in with Amorites. Why? Because they're all Canaanites. Remember, Sargon of Akkad is a Cushite. These are all Canaanites. So, of course, they're intermarried. That's why you see Amr Sin in Ur, okay? So, Adad is being honored here. We see Sin. So, we know around here, Sin's probably dead. They start to honor him. Notice the date here. Abraham goes into Canaan in 1875. Sargon seems to take over around 1950. Sin is deified when Sargon takes over. And then Sargon is going to go up into Mari, where and Ebla in Mari and Ebla is where Dagon and Hadad are honored. Okay, so this is in the generation of Manishtushtu. If you move it down to this, 1920s timeline, this is when he takes over Mari, and then we see Sin. Why? You see Adad still here. And this is when they start to fall apart. And then what happens? Well, they keep using Sin. And notice we don't have hundreds and hundreds of years like you have in the Sumerian kings list. We have Hammurabi. Hammurabi is the guy who seems to build the Tower of Babel. The late chronology, 1886 or 1686, 1680, would have been around the time that Joseph and his family are in Egypt. It's around that time. And that's when he's using an interpreter. This is the guy who builds the Tower of Babel. So these are chronologies that disagree with each other. And we have Hammurabi building the Tower of Babel somewhere, I think, between probably 1750 down to 1700. And then Samson-Luna, his son, is when everything starts to fall apart. And you have all of a sudden every corner of his empire throws off his rule, and the Sumerians just suddenly disappear. 1678, 1674. The latest dates on these match to around the time that Joseph's famine is. And so you see all these lists ending. Everything ends around the time of Joseph's famine. Why? What's the cause of Joseph's famine? The Tower of Babel incident. Everything's falling apart. And then you enter into this, they call it the Near Eastern Dark Age for 200 years. Why? Because the Tower of Babel. They can't understand each other's languages anymore. Nobody's keeping records anymore. And they're fighting over the turf and the food. That's it. So this is what I'm telling you. This is the conclusion I came to with my Serpent by the Way book. If you just take this and you understand Sargon is a propagandist. He's changing the religion. He's changing times and laws. He's an antichrist. And he and his sons are out to be worshipped as gods. Then then this is garbage. Then the Sumerians' kings list is garbage. And we look at it and we just use some common sense and go, okay, take these lists and do it side by side. And this is what I do here. And what do you have? You have two different guys caught up around the middle point of about 10 generations. That's around where Enoch is caught up. So two different guys. So what are these? These are two different people groups who are keeping track of the famous guys, and one of them, right around the middle, gets caught up into heaven. That's Enoch. Okay? That's simple. And then you have war breaking out, and you have the government just getting passed over, but these are all contemporary lists, and they start at the beginning of their list of whoever's in charge of their city, the family line that's in charge. They don't start at the point when it gets overthrown. So you put all these side by side, and what do you have? You have about 10, 11 generations, and then the flood. That's what you have. If you take the same thing with Sargon, notice I'm just lining stuff up. So we have Amar Sin is up here. We have Ishtar up here. These are the first references to Ishtar as being honored, okay? This would have been around the time that Ishtar starts producing Nephilim. Ishtar or Ashtra seems to mean star wife. Ishra means the woman who became pregnant. Baal means husband. And Dumuzid, the bull of heaven, is what they're going to merge Inanna with Ashtra to create Ishtar. This is what the Akkadians do. They just keep merging pre-flood gods and famous people with post-flood gods and famous people into one person. That's what they do, okay? So we see Ishtar, around the time Amar and Sin are united, and we see Ishtar making Nephilim babies. Then we go down to here when Naram Sin does it, and you have Ishtar is dead. And after Ishtar is dead, you have these, here's the Sumerian vassals under them, which are, remember, these are Sinites and Amorites who are married in together. We see when they take over Mari, we see Dagon here. When Ashra is dead, we see the next guy touched by Ishtar. This is when they create Ishtar, okay, as a god. She's dead, so we're deifying her as touched by Ishtar, okay? If you go down here, we see Nur-Adad. This is because the Amorites are taking over, and they reverence Hadad, Dagon and Hadad, okay? From Mari, and Mari is the main government of the Amorites. So you see Adad start popping up in here, and then you see Sin. So you're going to see Sin, Amur, Hadad, and Dagon. Why? Because Mari is the main place they're ruling from, and one is the forefather of the Amorites, and one's the forefather of the Sinites. And so you see Sin, and then you see here's Adad again. Lim is the family. This Lim family is the ones who are ruling from Mari. And then the Shamshi Adad means he's under Shamash. By this time, Shem is dead, and so they're deifying him as Shamash, and Adad is Hadad. So he's under Shem, who's now the sun god, and Hadad, who's the storm god. And then you see Dagon, and then you see Bel-Bani, and Bel means Bel is the creator, and that's based on Cush. So you see the expected deities as the Amorites are taking over, and then what happens is Isin, which seems to be responsible for the last editions of the Sumerian Kings list, they disappear. Larsa actually marries in with the Hammurabi's dynasty. So you see Rimsin 1 here and Rimsin 2 here. And they're also involved with the Ur 3 period. And then you see Hammurabi take over the whole thing. And when Hammurabi takes over the whole thing, you see these other dynasties end. Because remember, this would have been Assyria. This would have been Mari, which would have been Syria. And he's in Babylon. And so these end when Hammurabi takes over. These end when Hammurabi takes over. And what you have over here, where it concludes, Samsu-Iluna, these are loose dates. Remember, you could have a range of about 50 years. But it ends around the time that Joseph goes into Egypt. So what do you have? You have the flood, where the flood is. You have a bunch of disruptions in the list where the flood happens. Then you have a bunch of BS where they're making it a straight long line when it should be side by side. Because after Sargon is overthrown, you have multiple different dynasties in Ur, Uruk, Isin, and Larsa who are trying to take over the government that used to belong to the Sinites before Sargon took over. And then they all get taken over by the Amorites, and so that fails. And then the Amorites have the Tower of Babel, and then you're in the era of Joseph. It's that simple. So what I'm showing you here, I'm showing you all this to go, I don't have an exact chronology. I have estimates that are based on just one simple equation. I think these guys, Sargon of Akkad, were incentivized to lie. So I'm going to take a break here, but I'm going to show you the same thing with the LXX. Who wrote the LXX? Not 72 scholars who were commissioned by the Maccabees who had incentive to lie. Why? Because they were taking over the throne of David and they were taking over the priesthood of Levi. They were antichrists. And they commission the LXX that has tons of stuff changed and removed. Tons of stuff changed and removed related to the Messiah, related to the restoration of David's kingdom, related to the restoration of the Moabites to land, the Ammonites to land, all these prophecies that don't fit their political agenda, they just scrub it out or change the wording. And it's endless that they do this. And I think the guy who does it is this guy named Aristobulus, because Aristobulus is this Greek guy who is he's this Jewish guy who's trained in Aristotle's school, who is trying to go around convincing people that Greek philosophy came from Moses. He's just a liar. He's a serial liar, but he's a scholar, and he's trying to convince the world that Greek philosophy started with Moses. And there's other people in his era who are trying to convince him that the Egyptian mysteries started with Moses too. And so what are they doing? They're lining up look, this is just one example here. All this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 verses gone. 8, 9, 10, 11 verses gone. Gone. Why? Do you know what these verses say? These verses say that that heaven and earth will cease before God allows the line of David and the line of Levi to cease to have someone to represent them on the throne and the priesthood. Who would be incentivized to remove that? How about the Maccabees, who are taking over the throne and the priesthood and are not of the line of Zadok and are not of the line of David? This is easy. When you just sit here and go, Game of Thrones, y'all, who is incentivized to lie? And what's changed? It's that simple. You just ask yourself two questions. Who is incentivized to lie, and what's changed? And when you ask those two questions, it is really obvious. We have not a shred of archaeological or textual evidence that the LXX existed before the Maccabees. Not one shred, except for this completely BS letter to Aristius, which is first referenced by Aristobulus, who is written to by Judah Maccabees in 2nd Maccabees. It's like the usual suspects are all in one room. And this thing just magically pops out called the LXX with this magical, like, Joseph Smith and the Golden Tablet style story that comes with it, where literally they're talking about these copies of the Jewish Septuagint that were written in gold in the immediate generation after Jerusalem is sacked by Ptolemy. And yet they have these golden, we've never seen golden ink. Doesn't exist. But they have these copies of the Torah, which are written in golden ink. And they happen to have exactly 6 scribes who are experts in Greek, Hebrew, and the Torah from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And they write this magical King James only perfect version of the Old Testament that just happens to have 20% of Jeremiah erased. Every last prophecy about the branch of David removed, or the word branch just blossom or stem or something else, they change it. All the prophecies about Gentiles, about how Zedekiah went into Babylon because of his wickedness is gone. It's pro-Jew, anti-Gentile throughout. It's pro-Manethos Aegyptica in terms of its timeline. It's pro... The Messiah is not the Son of God. He's just a guy who's going to restore Solomon's throne. And I'm going to show you all this stuff. And all this stuff about the line of David continuing and stuff, gone. Solomon's throne is to be restored in the future, not the line of David is to be perpetuated in the future. And it's just this really obvious orgy of evidence that this was made up by the Maccabees to support their false claim that they were the Messianic age. And it boggles my mind that your scholars are saying, we think the LXX is the better translation. It's like a last days apostasy thing, so we're going to get into this in a minute. So, as a starting point, we want to make sure we understand this. The first guy who mentions this letter of Aristius, or says something that alludes to knowing about it, is this guy Aristobulus. And this guy Aristobulus is a historical revisionist. He's a Greek Hellenist syncretist who is claiming that Moses is the source of Greek philosophy, and people in his era and in his network seem to be putting forward ideas that the Egyptian mysteries began with Moses too. So what do we have here in 2nd Maccabees, which was, this was written in the 130s, so Judas Maccabees was dead, but it's supposedly based on 5 books that were written by a guy who was contemporary with the Maccabees. It says in the 184th year, so the 188th year, the people that were at Jerusalem and in Judea and the council of Judas sent greeting and health to Aristobulus, King Ptolemy's master, who was of the stock of anointed priests, and to the Jews that were in Egypt. Now, why does it say King Ptolemy's master? Here's why. I don't know if this is true or not, that Aristobulus was the head of the library, but the head of the Alexandrian library was the tutor, was the teacher, the master of the next in line to the throne. So if they're saying greeting and health to Aristobulus, King Ptolemy's master, they're saying he's the head of the Alexandrian library and he is over Ptolemy's throne. Now, the guy who started the Alexandrian library was from the school of Aristotle. That was the guy who started it. The guy who is mentioned in the letter, he's the same guy who's mentioned. He's dead by the time the letter is written. It's not historically accurate, but he's mentioned as the guy who goes and gets the 72 scholars. He's the guy who starts the Library of Alexandria. Aristobulus went to the same school as him. He's about a century after him, but they went to the same school. So do you think they're well aware of a guy who started the Alexandrian library from his school? Yeah. Okay. So it makes sense that a guy from the school of Aristotle might be the next head librarian for the Alexandrian library and the tutor to the king. See where these pieces are all attached together. He's the head of the Alexandrian library. He's the tutor to the king of the Ptolemies, who are the pharaohs now, and their official history is Manetho's Egyptica. He says, who was of the stock of anointed priests. So Aristobulus is saying that he was descended from the anointed priests and to the Jews that were in Egypt. So he's the stock of anointed priests of the Jews that were in Egypt. Now, we've covered this in other videos. Who are the priests to the Jews that were in Egypt? That's the Elephantine Island priesthood. So who is he saying Aristobulus is? Aristobulus is of the line of priests on Elephantine Island. The ones who worshiped Yahoo, Anat, Yahoo, and Hashem. So these theories that I'm telling you about how I think the priests in Elephantine Island were responsible for writing, the ones who God cursed, the ones who were worshiping the Queen of Heaven and all this, who God curses in Jeremiah, are responsible for the LXX. This theory is becoming more substantiated. He says Aristobulus is the head of the Alexandrian library, who was of the stock of the anointed priests and to the Jews that were in Egypt. So it sounds like he's writing to the heirs of the Jews who were in Egypt. And the rest of the Alexandrian Jews are freed slaves from Ptolemy II, who would have just been there like less than a century. These guys have been there for like 400 years, and they had a priesthood. He says, insomuch as God has delivered us from great perils, we thank him highly, having been in battle against a king, for he cast them out that fought with the holy city. And when the leader has come into Persia, the army with him that seemed invincible, they were slain in the temple of Nanea by the deceit of Nanea's priest. They're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. For Antiochus, as though he would marry her, came into the place, and his friends that were with him to receive money in the name of a dowry. And when the priest of Nanea had sent forth, he was entered in a small company into the compass of the temple, and they shut the temple as soon as Antiochus come in. And opening the privy door of the roof, they threw stones and thunderbolts, and struck down the captain, hewed him to pieces, smote off their heads, and cast them those who were without. Blessed be our God Almighty. So this is how they're saying Antiochus has died. They've been spreading around, just so you know, that Antiochus died because he was struck by an angel. because the prophecy in Daniel says he needs to be killed without hand. But they're telling another story about how Antiochus died by a bunch of people throwing rocks on his head. That's not without hand. See how he doesn't fit the Daniel prophecy? But they need him to fit. So he then says, he then talks about, therefore, whereas we are proposed to keep the purification of the temple until the 5 and 20th day of the month of Caslu, so this is Hanukkah, we thought it necessary to certify you of that you might keep it as the Feast of Tabernacles. Remember in Zechariah, it talks about how when Judah comes and fights, he's talking about the Messiah on the Mount of Olives, but he says even Judah will fight, and then it says they keep the Feast of Tabernacles after that. So what are they asking him to do? They're saying, come and keep the Feast of Tabernacles that we started instituting to purify the temple. What is he supposed to do after the abomination of desolation? Purify the temple. And he says, and the fire that was given us when Nehemiah offered sacrifice after he had built the temple and the altar. And he talks about this stuff, okay? So then he's telling the story, and then all this stuff is basically like legends that happened in Jeremiah's day, which are very untrue. And it ends with him saying this. So remember, this is to Aristobulus and the Jews in Alexandria. He says, the same things that were reported in the writings and commentaries of Nehemiah, and how he, founding a library, gathered together the acts of the kings and the prophets and of David and the epistles and the kings concerning holy gifts. In like manner, also Judas gathered together all those things that were lost by reason of the war, and they remained with him. So what is he talking about? He's talking about the wider book of the scriptures. Wherefore, if you have need thereof, send someone to fetch them for you. Remember, what starts to emerge after Judas Maccabees? The oldest extant manuscripts that we can find of the LXX. And he's telling them, we've got the kings and the prophets and the writings of David. If you need them, we'll send them to you. And they're all progressively written. It starts with the Pentateuch, and then it gets progressively written over the time of basically Judas Maccabeus and his brother. Like if you look at everybody's conclusions and when they're written, they're all basically the mid to the late 2nd century. So this is written in the 130s. And what it's doing is it's a writing that starts with this letter to Aristobulus. So what do we see? We see some substantial evidence that Aristobulus is the one leading the LXX, the writing of the LXX. And he probably forges the letter to Aristias and says he found it. So after this, we have, remember, this letter, which according to Eusebius, Aristobulus is the first person to mention it, which talks about the sacred 72 scholars and all this, okay? All of the scholars who have analyzed this letter based on stuff in it, they argue that it was written at best in the early 2nd century, at worst around 100 BC. So the average of that would be in the days of Aristobulus. Okay? So that's the evidence we have that Aristobulus wrote the LXX, or led a team that wrote the LXX. That's number one. Number two is he's the teacher to Ptolemy, who's the pharaoh. So he's got a lot of incentive to line up the LXX with the Manethos Egyptica. That's number two. Number three is, holy crap, when you read the book. Now, I found for you guys, if you want to shortcut this and just ignore me and read somebody who's a better writer, this is the Creation Research Society, Quarterly 201. It literally just goes through and documents all these radical changes to the Messianic prophecies in the LXX. I'll just give you an example. So he shall sprinkle many nations. That's the Gentiles being sprinkled with the blood of Christ. Thus shall many nations wonder at him. Just read these differences. For unto us a child is born, a son is given, whose government is on his shoulder, and he will be called Messenger of Great Counsel, or Angel of Great Counsel. I will bring peace upon the princes and health to him. That's the LXX. Here's the Masoretic. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. That's radically different. And it's over and over and over again. They change the Messianic prophecies so they can fit Judah Maccabees and his heirs, basically. Here's the LXX. And in that day, God will shine gloriously in counsel on the earth and exalt and glorify the remnant of Israel. In that day, the branch of the Lord, they hate this phrase, the branch. They destroy it anywhere they find it because they know the branch, the first reference to the branch is about the line of David. And they hate it. In that day, the branch of the Lord will be glorious and fruitful, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent in coming to all those that escaped of Israel. That's not on the planet. These are not on the same planet, these writings. And here's the thing. Not only are they doing this, these same LXX loving Alexandrians are spreading around rumors from the early church that the Jews are changing the Masoretic text to erase prophecies about the Messiah. The very thing that the LXX does. Here's the LXX. We brought a report as a child before him, and as a root in a thirsty land. He has no form or comeliness that we saw in him, but he had no form or beauty. It's the LXX. Here's the Masoretic text. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness that we should see him, no desire of the beauty that we should be him. Here's the LXX of Hosea 11:1. Early in the morning when they were cast off, the king of Israel had been cast off, for Israel has a child, and I loved him. And out of Egypt I have called his children. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Israel in Exodus is called the firstborn of God, because it's a type of Christ coming out of Egypt. Out of Egypt, out of Egypt. There's a pattern here, y'all. Back to Egypt or out of Egypt. Here's Zechariah. And I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and compassion, and they shall look upon me because they have mocked me, and they shall make lamentation for him as a beloved friend. They shall grieve intensely as for a firstborn son. And I will pour out on David and the house of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplications, and they will look upon him whom they pierced, and will mourn. They just take it out. They will look upon me. It's saying the Lord, and they're saying no, they'll look upon him who they pierced. Here's the LXX. Zechariah 13. Awake, awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man who is my citizen, saith the Lord Almighty. Smite the shepherds, and draw out the sheep. No, smite the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. These are all specific prophecies that the apostles are citing. And people are like, oh, the apostles love the LXX. Oh, the apostles, everything they get is quoted from the book of Enoch and all the Apocrypha. Not true. There's like one or two things in the whole New Testament that probably come from the historical writings of historical portions of Maccabees. Everything else that they say is from the Apocrypha you can find in the Old Testament if you just know your Bible. Because the Apocrypha rips off from the Old Testament. So there's lots of these. And they don't even, like, I found way more than just this. This is the first one. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. He shall watch against your head, and you shall watch against his heel. What? I'll put enmity between thee and the woman, between thee seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And I think you could argue that bruise could be crushed, because his heel would have been crushed and being pinned into the cross. And Satan's head is certainly crushed. So this is something you can get. Just look at extensive messianic prophecy or just Google like LXX changes to the Masoretic text, and some nerd is gonna write some stuff on it. And there's lots of it. There's endless of it. So because my next book, House of God, is I'm going to have to go through all the uses of God and Yahweh and the Lord and Elohim and all this stuff in the Old Testament to write this book. I am going to also look at the Septuagint as I do that. And I've already read through the whole Genesis of the Septuagint. And these are all the things that I found that are sus. Now, some of them, and I think they're the ones I mark in red, are just, it sounds different. Okay? That's it. But the yellow ones are like, that's suspect. He will watch your head and you will watch his heel. And God looked upon this, I talked about this in the last one. God looked upon Cain and his gifts and tells Cain that he's going to rule over Abel. You realize that would be God saying something that didn't come to pass because Cain goes and kills Abel right after that. It's not ruling over someone and you just murder them. He says to be still, his recourse is to you and you will rule over him. He's saying that Cain will rule over Abel. We have, it says that God will dwell in the tents of Shem. It says live in the houses of Shem. Talks about Calvary in Sodom and Gomorrah, which didn't exist in Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's just a bad translation. This is where Abraham gets rebuked for giving away Sarah the second time. And he says, these shall be to you for an honor of your person and to all those with you, and tell the whole truth. But it doesn't tell the whole truth because it doesn't say how he basically rebukes. He basically said, Abraham is one who turns the other way concerning you. In other words, if your wife is getting taken away, it's the kind of person that if somebody's getting bullied right in front of you, you pretend not to notice or look away or walk away. This is what they basically said to Abraham. Okay? So like, here I am in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I see this guy screaming at this girl who's sitting in her car terrified, and he starts punching her window until he punches it out. And I see 3 men who are as big or bigger than this guy turn around and walk away because they're cowards. And they're all younger than me. I'm in probably my almost 40 at the time. And I'm just like, well, I'm not the toughest guy in the world, but I'm not a coward. So I go walk over to the other guy and get in his face until he's distracted away from the girl until the police come. Because the girl's dripping blood because he just smashed a window in on her face, and 3 grown men in their 20s looked and just turned and walked away. That's what they're saying to Abraham. You're one of those biatches. Okay? And this is most people in the church today. The world just slanders the truth, and they would, let's just try to agree to get, let's just say polite things and just agree to disagree. Let's not bicker and argue over who killed who. We need unity. No, we don't. No, we don't. They say to Abraham, you are a king from a God among us. It says you're a mighty prince among us. Where Abraham says about the Messiah, on that place the Lord will provide, they change it to on that place the Lord appeared. Why? Because the implication is he's providing the sacrificial lamb for the Messiah. Concerning Jacob and Esau, he says, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from your uterus will be divided, and a people shall excel over a people. That's as generic as you can get. And the greater will be subject to the lesser. Now, greater and lesser is a term for older and younger. So what we have is a translation of meaning. It does say greater and lesser, so that's not technically wrong, but a people shall excel over a people is kind of strange. One shall serve the other is what it's saying, and the older shall serve the younger. Let's see. He calls Potiphar Pharaoh, some of these are just translation errors, okay? They call Potiphar Pharaoh's chief butcher. Problem is his baker and his winemaker are eunuchs, and this guy has a wife. So it's not his chief butcher, it's his chief of his guard. He changes the number of people that are taken into Egypt, which from 70 to 75. He adds grandchildren of Ephraim and Manasseh to do so. Why? Because he's trying to remove the 70 nations in the time of David. Why? Because they're following the Book of Jubilees, which has already been written. In the Book of Jubilees, is the Tower of Babel happened at the time of Peleg. That's where that comes from. It's a Jewish myth that I think Josephus repeats it. I could be wrong, but the LXX is basically built to conform to it. Why? Because Aristobulus was from that line of priests that wrote the Book of Jubilees. And so they change all the stuff that points to the nations being divided according to the number of the sons of Jacob, because it happens at the same time. Jacob has 70 sons and God divides the 70 nations at the same time, which is why that's when an interpreter pops up. This is the most obvious thing in the world. They're all speaking the same languages, and then all of a sudden they're using an interpreter. The prophecies to regarding Judah and Dan, they say about Judas, may your brothers praise you, and may your hand be on the back of your neck on your enemies. Your father's sons will do obeisance to you. A lion's whelp you are, Judas. From a shoot, my son, you went up. When you recline, you slept like a lion, and like a whelp, who will rise him? Should say like an old lion, and he changes it to a whelp. A ruler shall not be wanting from Judas, and a leader from his thighs, until the things stored up from him come, and he is the expectation of the nations. Why did you think they're changing this? Because it's Judah. Judas, that's the same name as Judas Maccabees. And so they're changing this. Notice it says, a ruler shall not be wanting from Judas, and a leader from his thighs, until the things stored up for him come, and he is the expectation of the nations. Binding his foal to the vine, his donkey's full to the tendril. He shall wash his robe in wine, and his garment in the blood of a bunch of grapes. Okay, we could say that's not radically changed. The one regarding Dan, it says, Dan shall judge the people as one tribe in Israel, and let Dan become a snake on the road, a serpent by the way, lying in ambush on the path, biting the horse's field, and the rider shall fall backward, awaiting deliverance of the Lord. Awaiting the deliverance of the Lord. The rider shall fall backwards, awaiting the deliverance of the Lord. It says, I await your deliverance of the Lord. So it's saying when Dan does this, and this rider on the horse falls backwards, aka goes back under the law, which is in Isaiah 28, Jacob is saying, I await your deliverance, O Lord. That's the time of Jacob's trouble. Okay? And again, it talks about these grandchildren of Machir that we see are born on Joseph's thighs after Jacob dies. So we know it doesn't make sense. They're putting in stuff that is not in the text, is not translated right, and doesn't make sense at all. Okay? But that's not the worst book. The worst book is Jeremiah. And again, I haven't read through all these books, and I'm going to. But if you just do a search through Bible Hub, and you take a non-Septuagint version, okay? And you just type in the branch. It's a very important prophecy. Is the Psalm of Asaph. Okay? This is the first reference to the branch. He says, give ear, O shepherd of Israel, that thou leadest Joseph like a flock, that thou dwellest between the cherubims, shine forth. Who is he talking to? The Lord. Before Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh, stir up your strength and come save us, O God. Turn to us, O God, and cause your face to shine. We shall be saved. O Lord God, so O Yahweh Elohim of hosts, how long will you be angry against the prayer of your people? You feed them with the bread of tears. You give them tears to drink in great measure. You make us strife unto our neighbors, and our enemies laugh among themselves. Turn to us, O God of hosts, and cause your face to shine, and we shall be saved. You have brought a vine out of Egypt. You have cast it out to the heathen and planted it. You have cast out the heathen and planted it. Who's the vine that he brings out of Egypt? That's the Lord. He's called the vine. Out of Egypt I call my son. You prepared room before it. So that's the vine. And did cause it to take a deep root, and it filled the land. The hills were covered with the shadow of it. The boughs thereof were like goodly cedars. She sent out her boughs into the sea, and her branches unto the river. So notice that you have the root, and now you have her branches. Okay. Why hast thou then broken down her hedges, so that they which passed by the way do pluck her? Okay. So what we're looking at is a parallel between Israel and Christ. Okay. So the she whose branches go out to the river and the sea, that's Israel. Why have you broken down her hedges, so that they that pass by pluck at her? The boar and the wood does waste it, and the wild beast of the field devours it. Return, we beseech thee, O God, God of hosts, down from heaven, and behold and visit this vine, and the vineyard which your right hand has planted, and the branch that madest strong for thyself. So the branch has to do with Israel. It is burned with fire. It is cut down. The parish. So the vine is Israel. The branch is the line of David. Okay, and it's burned. It's burned with fire. It's cut down. The parish of the rebuke of your countenance. Let your hand be upon the man of your right hand, upon the Son of Man, whom you made strong for yourself. So the branch is the Son of Man. So will not we go back from thee? Quicken us, and we will call upon thy name. Turn us again, O Lord God of hosts, cause your face to shine, and we will be saved. So it's very clear that the branch is the Son of Man of the line of David. Now, he doesn't mention David here, but go to Isaiah. In that day shall the branch of the Lord be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely for them that are escaped of Israel. And it shall come to pass that he that is left in Zion, and he that remains in Jerusalem, shall be called holy, and everyone who is written among the living in Jerusalem. So we know the branch is in Zion. So that's Isaiah. Isaiah 25. No, that's the wrong one. And the people shall be righteous, and they shall inherit the land forever. The branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I shall be glorified. A little one shall become 1,000, and a small one shall become a strong nation. I, the Lord, will hasten it in time. So it's about the restoration. Now in Jeremiah. In those days and at that time, I will cause the branch of righteousness to grow up unto David. He is from the line of David. He takes the throne of David. And he shall execute judgment and righteousness in the land. And in those days shall Judah be saved, and Jerusalem shall dwell in safety. And his name, and Jerusalem shall dwell safely, and his name wherewith she shall be called, the Lord is our righteousness. So Jerusalem is going to be called the Lord is our righteousness. For thus saith the Lord, David shall never want a man to sit on the throne of the house of Israel. Neither shall the priests of the Levites want a man before me in burnt offerings, and to kindle meat offerings, and to do sacrifice continually. Wow, that's very specific. So Jeremiah 33, let's see if we can find that in the Septuagint. What happened to all those verses? Omitted. And you go through Jeremiah, they move everything around, they totally reorganize the book. And remember where Jeremiah ends up. He ends up with the Jews in Egypt. That's where he ends up in the end of the book. So we know the original version of Jeremiah they have. But it doesn't have all this stuff in it that the Jews have. Would people be like, oh, well, because they're in Egypt, they would know? No. It's because they hate the Messianic prophecies that they remove this. And they just keep on removing stuff. So I did Jeremiah, and I haven't even done the whole book. And these are how many major errors I've found. The branch is removed. Behold, the days are coming that I will raise up David a righteous dawn, and a king I will raise up for David a righteous dawn. And a king shall reign and shall understand and shall execute judgment and righteousness in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will be encamped in confidence. And this is the name by which the Lord shall call him, Josedek among the prophets. Josedek among the prophets. They're going to call him Josedek. I have in Jeremiah or in Zechariah that he's going to call the branch Yeshua or Yeshua, the name of Jesus. Okay, he says he's going to call him something else. This is Jeremiah 23. Jeremiah 23. Just so you know who Josedek is, he's the father of the priest that restarts Jerusalem. Because remember, the Maccabees come from the priesthood; they don't come from the line of David. And Josedek is one of the priests, and they're saying that he's the Messiah. He is the one that is going to be the righteous dawn that comes from David. So let's see what a real Bible translation says. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will raise up to David a righteous branch. Boy, they don't like that term, do they? A glorious dawn, a righteous branch. How do you get this mixed up? It literally, in every reference to the branch, it's samak. It's the same word, samak. How do you get righteous dawn? I will raise up to David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper. Let's see. A righteous dawn, and a king shall reign and shall understand. And he'll execute judgment on the earth. In his days shall be saved Judah and Israel, and this is the name by which it shall be called, the Lord our righteousness. The Lord our righteousness. So what do they say? Josedek. No. You could say Joe could be the Lord and Zedek is righteous. I will call him Josedek among the prophets. It just says the Lord is our righteousness. The one who the Messiah is the Lord. The Messiah is the Lord. He is literally, in his days, Judah will be saved, and his name whereby he shall be called the Lord is our righteousness. So Zechariah says his name will be Joshua or Yeshua. In Jeremiah, he says that he will be called the Lord is our righteousness. This is consistent throughout the whole Masoretic Old Testament, who the Jews who supposedly changed because they didn't want the Messiah to be Jesus. And yet everything points to Jesus, and it points to the Messiah being God, or the Son of God. Okay? Notice how it says 26 and 50 here. This is how wildly they rearrange it. This is a prophecy. Notice 24, 25, 26 is gone. 26 tells you how Ammon is going to be restored to the land after they're dispersed by God in Jeremiah. Verses 45 through 48, it erases here. So notice it jumps to 44 to 49. It tells you how there's still a bunch of Jews living in Babylon at the time of the Hasmoneans. And it says how every last Jew from Babylon is going to come back to the land, which they do after that. They all come back. They're actually attacked in Babylon, and they all come back to Judah after the Maccabees. Okay? So there's really not many more Jews left in the land at that point. It's all documented by Josephus. In chapter 31, or in their case, so you notice how these are chapters 48 and 25. They're in 31. They rearranged Jeremiah all over the place. It's like they're changing Jeremiah more than anything, and so they're rearranging all the chapters all over so you won't find it. It will be hard to compare to another Bible. Because imagine if you just got a scroll and you're literally trying to figure out what they're changing. He who flees before will fall into a pit. Notice you have 43 through 45. Erases 3 verses that say Moab is going to be brought back to land. Why? Because the other side of the Jordan, the land of the Moabites and the Ammonites, the Hasmoneans are taking over. So if you look for the Hasmonean kingdom map, the lands of Moab would be over here. See, there's the Jordan, so over here. Ammon, would be over here, and Moab would be down here. But the Maccabees have taken over all that. So they can't have prophecies about the Moabites being restored to their land. So they just remove them. They remove them. Over here, because the Lord has created salvation for a new planting in which the people will go about in safety. That's Jeremiah 31:22. Let's look at that in the real Bible. Jeremiah 31:22. How long will you go about, O backsliding daughter? For the Lord has created a new thing in the earth. A woman shall encompass a man. A woman shall encompass a man. He's talking about the bride of Christ, okay? And he actually goes on to say, behold, it comes in those days, I will make a new covenant. So they do keep the new covenant with the house of Judah, Israel and the house of Judah. But they change the thing about the body and the bride language. Again, we have chapter 33. Thus saith the Lord, thou shalt be in this place, that you waste the cities, lodging the shepherds, resting the sheep, in the cities of the hill country, in the cities of Shephelah, in the cities of the Negev, in the land of Benjamin, and all those in Jerusalem, and the cities of Judea. Sheep shall again pass under the hand of one who counts them, says the Lord. That's pretty generic. So basically, you're going to say there's some kind of restoration, right? Okay, that seems like a good place to end. Except they remove 12 verses. 12 verses. 33. What are the verses that they remove? Oh, they end there in verse 12. What does it say after that? It says, behold, the days come that I will perform a good thing, which I have promised to the land of Israel and the house of Judah. In those days at that time, I will cause a branch of righteousness to grow up to David, and he will execute judgment and righteousness in the land. And in those days, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will dwell safely. And this is the name where it will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. All that they just remove. And then I thought about this, and I go, I just started searching for all the Messianic prophecies and see if they're all changed. And they are all changed. All the Messianic prophecies are changed. And I don't know how anybody can sit there and go, so I'm going to go back to the first Davidic, because remember, they're after the Davidic throne. The Maccabees have claimed the Davidic throne. Okay? They're even dealing with the Romans and the Ptolemies right away to confirm them as the kings of Israel against Antiochus. They're playing politics right in the beginning. Even Judas Maccabeus is doing this. So I go to the first Davidic promise, 2 Samuel 7, and I read it very carefully. And what does it say? It says, when your days are fulfilled, he's talking to David, so when you're dead, and you shall sleep with your father. So after David dies, he says, I will set up your seed after you. So this is not Solomon, because Solomon set up while he's still alive. He makes a special point of this, so it's not Solomon. Which shall proceed out of your bowels, or your loins, and I will establish his kingdom. I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So it's not Solomon, because Solomon was established when David was still alive. It's somebody who's established after David dies, who's going to build his house, so it's not Solomon. Well, his house is rebuilt by the time the Maccabees get there. But that would be Zerubbabel. That would be someone from the line of David that builds his house. And that's Zerubbabel. And they say Zerubbabel is going to be a signet ring, and he's going to be the one the Messiah comes from. That's what they say, okay? So he's going to build his house, and then the larger type of that is going to be Jesus building the house of God through the church. Okay, so you have two buildings of his house. It's not Solomon, because it's somebody who comes after David dies, and Zerubbabel's one. And this is why Zechariah and Haggai prophesy about Zerubbabel, how important he is. That's who the line of David's going to come from. And this is why he's in the genealogy of both Mary and Joseph. Okay? So he says, I will be a father, and he will be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chase him with the rod of men and the stripes of men. But my mercy shall not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, who I put away from you. Okay? So that is the real Bible Now let's look what the fake Bible says. The books are called first through fourth reign, so first through fourth Kings. He says, and it will be when your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers that I will raise up your offspring after you. Notice he doesn't say a seed after you, your offspring after you, who will be from your belly, and I will prepare his kingdom. He shall build me a house for my name, and I will restore his throne forever. Notice he says, I will restore his throne forever. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. And if injustice comes, I will punish him with the rod of men and tax the son of men. But I will not remove my mercy from him, as I removed those who removed it from. As I removed it from those whom I removed from before me, from Saul. Why does he say that? From those who I removed it from before me. And his house and his kingdom will be made sure forever before me, and his throne will be restored forever. Notice it doesn't say he's going to establish his throne forever. Notice it's his throne, not David's throne. So who is this? Well, here's the problem. This doesn't work because Zerubbabel is not restored as to the throne of David. He's just a governor. He's not restored. He does build David's house, but he's just a governor. So they're talking about the one who his throne is restored to being forever, not establishing his throne forever. So again, we look at real Bible. He says, I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Not as he took it away from Saul. Your house and your kingdom will be established forever before thee. So it's very clear. It's David's throne. I will establish the throne of your seed forever, and your throne, David's throne, will be established forever. Is that what this says? He says, no. He says, he will build a house, and I will restore his throne forever, and I will be a father to him. And then he says, and his house and his kingdom will be made sure forever before me, and his throne will be restored forever. So when is the throne restored? Well, they would say Judas Maccabeus took over. So notice it's the one from his offspring. Just it says he will prepare his kingdom and build a house. He prepares it and builds a house, and I'll restore his throne forever. So Zerubbabel just does the preparation, and the restoration of the throne is Judas Maccabeus. And you just go through all this stuff, and everything that seems to be changed. He changes the 70 shepherds, fixes the nations according to the number of the divine sons. There's nothing in the Old Testament that says God gave them over to 70 angels. Nothing. It's only in the book of Enoch. So he matches the 70 shepherds that are in the book of Enoch with the divine sons here. That's from the book of Enoch. The rock language, he said he abandoned the God who made him. He departed from God, his Savior, not the rock, his Savior. Because remember, Jesus is the rock in the wilderness. And again, he removes the rock. For our God is not like their gods. Our rock is not like their gods. So the idea of Jesus being the rock is in the Masoretic Old Testament, which Paul says is Christ. But it's removed from the Septuagint. And they just constantly just keep changing the Messianic language. So here's the Daniel's version. 70 weeks are decided for your people in the city, for sin to be consummated and make iniquities scarce. No, put an end to iniquities. And to blot out iniquities and to comprehend the vision for everlasting righteous, to be given for the vision, to be consummated and glad in the Holy of Holies. So you shall understand, you shall rejoice and discover the ordinances to respond, and I will build Jerusalem as a city for the Lord. And after 7 weeks and 77 and 70 and 62 weeks, an anointing will be removed and shall not be, and a king of the nations will demolish the city and sanctuary along with the anointed one, and his consummation will come with wrath even until the time of consummation, and he will be attacked through war, and the covenant will prevail for many, and it will return again and be rebuilt broad and long. So what are the Maccabees trying to do? Maccabees are trying to do is teach that their rule is supposed to keep expanding and expand the covenant to the surrounding nations. And that's what they do. They force the surrounding nations to be circumcised, even if they're not Jews, even if they're not living in the land of Israel, because they're taking over their lands outside of Israel. They're forcing them to be circumcised. And they change this thing to something that makes no sense, the consummation of times, even after 7 years and 70 times and 62 times. So they're adding 70 times, just so you know. So 70 times 7, if these were 360-day years, just so you know, in their calculation, would be 70 plus 7 plus 62 times 7 is 970 years. See, if they had it correctly, it would be 483 years, which would take you right down to the time of Christ. So they changed it to 973 years. It just makes no sense at all. And it's about this covenant being returning again after someone destroys the city and the temple. So what are they making it about? They're making it about the Maccabees restoring the covenant after Antiochus destroys the city. They're changing everything. And it's all specific change. All these changes point to the Maccabees. So that's all I'm going to cover right now. Again, in my book, I get into the Egyptian kings list a bit and the Sumerian kings list a bit in the introduction and in my chapter on Egypt, because I believe these are usurpers and they change times and laws in order to cover up their usurpation and the evil of what they did. And I believe the Maccabees do the same thing. Were they wrong to fight against Antiochus? No, I don't think they were. But what they are wrong to do was claim the throne of David and the priesthood afterwards. And we have all kinds of Jewish stuff from the Second Temple period that says the Jews hated them for doing that. When they finally get overthrown, we have these letters of Solomon, how they say that that was God rebuking them and they deserved it. So I would keep stuff like that in mind as you look at these lists. And when you look at people who are pro Sumerian kings list and pro Manetho and Turin kings list and stuff like that and pro LXX, remember, they're just going with what's easiest. See, if we push all this biblical stuff before their chronologies and timelines, well, then we don't have to fight the secular claims. It's the same thing people do when they create a gap theory or an old Earth to not have to fight with the evolutionists and the old Earth people. The people of God have always been doing this. And it's never the people of God who are more righteous and more holy. It's always the people who want to fit in with the world. And I would just counsel you guys to go, if anyone is saying LXX, ask them, are you aware of all the messianic prophecies they change? Are you aware that there's no evidence that this came before the Maccabees? There's no substantial evidence. And when they point to the letter of Aristias, because that's all that they're going to point to, they're going to keep telling you, oh, the church fathers believe this. Oh, Josephus believed this. I don't care. They were duped. That's not a standard to me. I believe in historiography and what is historically credible. And it is not credible to believe that any part of the Septuagint was written before the Maccabees. And it makes sense that it would be written in that time because the Maccabees were Hellenists and they were courting the favor of the Romans and the Ptolemies in their kingdom. And it makes sense that at that time they would create a official Septuagint that they knew they would like. And that's what they did. So I hope you guys are blessed by this. Again, I'm going to stand on the Septuagint being a Maccabean forgery meant to support their rule and appease the Ptolemies. It's that simple. Hope you guys are blessed by this. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.